Hey guys, so this is going to be our first in a series of PowerPoints that focus on Module C, the craft of writing. We're going to start today by looking at the rubric, looking at the text types, and looking at some examples of what you can expect from the exam itself. So what is the craft of writing? This module aims to help you guys develop your writing skills across persuasive, informative, reflective, and discursive text types. We tend to forget about these text types a little bit because we focus so much on the essays. So this unit gives us a chance to go back and look at these text types in more detail and gives you guys a chance to actually create some writing in these text types. Throughout this module, you will strengthen your writing skills through drafting and editing processes. You'll also study at least 2 short prescribed texts that will help you to understand how other writers craft their writing. What I'm going to get you guys to do now is on Edmodo, just below this video, you will see the rubric for the craft of writing. It's also in your craft of writing booklet. And what I'm going to get you to do is to highlight the key words in that rubric, like we've done for other rubrics in the past. Then I'm going to get you to rewrite it as one paragraph in your own words, just to help you really understand what we will be doing. So now that you've completed that activity, I'm going to kind of go over the rubric specifics and the most important parts of the rubric that you probably should have pulled out. So in Module C, you need to write for a range of different audiences and purposes. You need to use language to convey ideas and emotions with power and precision. So what does that mean in itself? Basically that you'll be writing for formal and informal audiences. You might be writing to persuade, to entertain, or to inform. You also will be using different language techniques and features in order to achieve certain aims, whether that be to persuade someone, whether it is to entertain them with a creative story, or to reflect on your writing. You're also going to evaluate how writers use language creatively and imaginatively for a range of purposes. And that's going to happen when we look at our 2 prescribed texts and look at how those writers have used language forms and features to achieve their purposes. You're also going to appreciate, analyze, and evaluate the power of language. Consider purpose, audience, and context to deliberately shape meaning. Produce highly crafted, imaginative, discursive, persuasive, and informative texts. And you're going to, once again a reminder, analyze at least 2 of the prescribed texts from this module. As you would have seen in the rubric, this module does require you to engage with a range of different text types, some of them that you may not be as familiar with. So in this PowerPoint, I'm going to go through and break down those text types. In this module, you can be required to write in an imaginative, discursive, persuasive, informative, or reflective type of writing. So what you're going to do now is, even if you're not entirely certain what those text types entail, I'm going to get you to try and list places where you might encounter these text types, either in daily life or, when you're online and things like that. Moving on to the text types themselves, I've decided to start with imaginative, as it's a text type that you are probably already familiar with. So to start off with, I've got our NESA glossary definition here. These are texts that represent ideas, feelings, and mental images in words or visual description. An imaginative text might use metaphor to translate ideas and feelings into a form that can be communicated effectively to an audience. So basically, imaginative texts are our fiction books, our short stories, things like that allow you to use a lot of figurative language and descriptive language to play around with words and engage or entertain an audience. Now with imaginative texts, what should you be focusing on? So imaginative texts require you to use a range of techniques to both engage and entertain the audience. So you should catch their attention and they should be interested in what you're writing. So when writing in this text type, you should think carefully about your word choice, tense, perspective, which is our point of view and narrative distance, the syntax that you're using, so the way the words go together, dialogue, setting, characterization, imagery, and your usage of figurative language. One thing that's really important in Module C, and especially when writing an imaginative text, is to read the questions closely, as this will tell you what type of story the exam or the practice question is asking you to write. It could be a complete narrative, it could be a continuation of a narrative, or you may just have to incorporate specific features into your writing. So always make sure you start out by reading over the question and knowing exactly what you need to do. Okay, so the next text type we are going to focus on is the discursive. So this text type may not be one that you have heard of before, and I am going to do another PowerPoint that focuses exclusively on discursive later on in the week. So this text type involves writing without the direct intention of persuading the reader to adopt any single point of view. And these texts can be humorous or serious in tone and can have a formal or informal register. So what that basically means is that these texts are a bit like a traditional essay in the fact that there are forms and features you need to incorporate, but instead of being restricted to the evidence you're using or the formality of your tone, you're able to really engage with the reader one-on-one and use a range of different evidence. So this writing allows you to explore a concept in an engaging and interesting way, and you can incorporate evidence from a range of sources, such as actual textual evidence, so quotes and things like that, anecdotes from maybe your day or other people's, pop culture, the media itself. You can also use textual allusions, so things like references to Shakespeare or historic texts, and facts. Techniques you can use are rhetorical question, personal pronouns, and figurative language. In a lot of ways, a discursive text reads a lot like a speech or like an editorial article in a newspaper. So they can come in many forms, including creative nonfiction, travel blogs, BuzzFeed articles, speeches, or personal essays. And I find thinking about discursive essays as personal essays, ones where you can show off your writing style, is a good way to kind of wrap your head around them. Now, as you can see, I'm moving pretty quickly through these. If you are taking notes as you go, or if you just want to pause and kind of take a break, that is the advantage of having these online. So feel free to pause and, undertake this PowerPoint at your own pace. So our next form of text is persuasive, and we have our NESA glossary definition again. Persuasive texts seek to convince the responder of the strength of an argument or point of view through information, evidence, construction of arguments, critical analysis, and the use of rhetorical, figurative, and emotive language. They include the kind of essays that you'd write in class, debates, arguments, discussions, advertising, and propaganda. This text type is usually your analytic essay that you write in class and have been writing since the junior years, and is the most common response type that you will use for the HSC. It involves arguing a point using the formal conventions of an essay. So you'll be using teal paragraphs, conclusion, an introduction, textual evidence with quotes, and technical analysis. So this one probably doesn't need much more explanation because we have done it to death in class. If you're still unsure though, there are a lot of resources in your booklets that we've done earlier on in the year. So our fourth text type is reflective. Now, this text type was part of your first Year 11 assignment where you had to write a creative text with a reflection on The Great Gatsby. So you should be fairly familiar with this text type, but that's no excuse for us not to go back over it and make sure that everyone is familiar and confident writing in this way. So, our glossary definition. This is the thought process by which students develop an understanding and appreciation of their own learning. This process draws on both cognitive and affective experience. Another quote there is consciously thinking about and analysing what one has done or is doing. So a reflection requires you to explain your choices in writing and also explain the process that you went about when creating a piece of writing. It should use first-person language, incorporate direct textual evidence from your own or others' work, depending on what the question is asking you. It should communicate the why, what, and how you have written. It will make connections between what you have learned and your writing. And in it, you will explain, describe, or justify why you have used specific language or stylistic devices in your writing. So remember, this text type is kind of awesome because it allows you to point out the specific features, techniques, and things that you have incorporated into your writing that you want to show off to the marker. It allows you to essentially point at your work and say, here is the metaphor that I have incorporated, or I've incorporated this awesome motif and I want you to see that I've put it there. So our final text type is informative, and this text type's a little bit strange to see seated here amongst our more traditional English texts. It's usually something we see more of in science or PDHPE. But these are texts whose primary purpose is to provide information through explanation, description, argument, analysis, and ordering. These texts include reports, explanations, and descriptions of natural phenomena, recounts of events, instructions and directions, rules and laws, news bulletins, websites, and text analysis. So these texts' primary purpose is to provide information. They include reports, explanations, and descriptions. They feature specific factual evidence. They're usually in the present tense. They can use subheadings, and they can use precise language, formal language, and technical jargon. The way we'll usually see an informative text in English is something like a book review, or guides on how to achieve certain things. This text type is one that you've probably done a lot in the junior years, and we don't focus on as much in year 11 and 12. Okay, so on to the exam itself. Module C is a whole module that you do need to study for the HSC, and so it is a part of your exam. It is part of paper 2. And in the exam, it can require you to have one question that may have up to 2 different parts. So basically what that means is they could ask you to write a creative text and then write a reflection about it. They could also require you to write a discursive or informative or persuasive text and then write another text type if they wanted. The question itself will require an imaginative, discursive, persuasive, informative, or reflective response. So that's why I keep saying those words over and over again. According to NESA's marking criteria, your answer will be assessed on how well you craft language to address the demands of the question. That means, as I was saying before, it is incredibly important that you read that question closely and know what it is that you are needing to do. You also need to use language appropriate to audience, purpose, and context to deliberately shape meaning. And what that means is that you're using specific language techniques, specific techniques of the form that you're writing in, and you're addressing the audience and the, background of the people that you're talking to. So if you've been asked to write a persuasive essay, you're going to use different formality and you're going to use different conventions than if you were writing a creative story or if you were writing a discursive text. Now, what does this Module C paper kind of look like? So what I have here are some screenshots from the sample paper that came out in 2018, and they give some good examples of what these questions could look like. So example A is worth 20 marks. Another thing you should be aware of is the amount of marks. If you have a question that has a part A and a part B, those marks could be distributed in very different ways, and the amount of marks dedicated to each section will tell you how much you should write. If each section is worth 10 marks, you're going to want to equally write that information. If one section is worth 5 marks and another is worth 15, you're going to need to write less for the 5-mark section. So, guard your roving thoughts with a jealous care, for speech is but the dealer of thoughts, and every fool can plainly read in your words what is the hour of your thoughts. Alfred Lord Tennyson. So, what this question is asking you to do is to use this warning as a stimulus for a piece of persuasive, discursive, or imaginative writing that expresses your perspective about a significant concern or idea that you have engaged with in one of your prescribed texts from Module A, B, or C. Now, that is a big question. It involves a lot of different parts and a lot of unpacking. So, you need to take some ideas out of that warning. When it says a stimulus, you need to be using it to stimulate your ideas. You then also need to pick which text type you are going to write in. I would recommend picking the text type that you are most comfortable with. Picking to do another persuasive essay probably isn't the best of ideas because you're not showing off the breadth of your writing, and also you're then going to have to write 3 essays in one exam. So your writing should express your perspective. It's asking for your personal perspective on a significant concern or idea that you have engaged with, except for your common module text. So once again, I want to reiterate how important it is to be reading these questions really carefully. So, do I have to incorporate that quote into my writing? No, you do not. If you're writing in discursive or persuasive or imaginative, you may use that quote if you want, but it does not have to be word for word there in your writing. It just has to be used as a stimulus for ideas. So this quote is cautioning you against speaking too much because it gives away your thoughts. So you'd need to incorporate that idea. Along with that, you would also have to incorporate a significant concern or idea from one of your prescribed texts from Module A, B, or C. Now, what else could this look like? That last question had 20 marks just dedicated to writing a creative response. Now, as I said before, the exam can ask you to respond to 2 parts of one question, and that's what we have here with example B. So it's still worth 20 total marks, but it's broken down in a different way. So part A for 12 marks asks you to choose a character, persona, or speaker from one prescribed text that you have studied in Module C, and express the thought processes of this character, persona, or speaker by exploring a moment of tension in the text from an alternative point of view. Now, once again, I want to draw your attention to the specifics of this question. It's specifically stating that it has to be a character, persona, or speaker from a text in Module C. And that's different to the last question, which was allowing you to refer to anything from Module A, B, or C. You also need to engage with the plot of your story in this question because it's asking you to explore a moment of tension in the text from an alternative point of view. So basically rewriting a scene in the text from the perspective of a different character. Now, the other thing that's different is that in this question we have a part B, which is asking you to justify the creative decisions that you have made in your writing in part A. And so that requires you to respond using a reflective text type where you talk about the decisions that you have made in this writing. You also need to look at the 12-8 mark division and allocate your time effectively, because if you've spent, 40 minutes writing your story and then leave yourself 5 minutes for the reflection, you're probably not going to get those full marks. Here we have an example of the 2019 HSC paper with the exam question. It was a 10 and 10 mark division that required you to write a imaginative, discursive, or persuasive piece and then to write a reflection. As you can see, the copyright restrictions mean that I cannot show you the stimulus or the extract, but you can get an idea for how things are divided up. At the end here, I've incorporated 3 different practice questions that you can work through at your own pace as we start to study more of our craft of writing prescribed texts. I am aware that we haven't covered those yet, but I will be putting up our first craft of writing text shortly, along with some explanation of some different techniques and things like that we can start working through as a class.